not some planned talk. And at any time you have questions, I'm not a scary person. I was sitting in one of these desks like 2 years ago, I promise. Please ask me questions. So this, as Ms. Ray said, in my sophomore year of high school in Dr. Strode's SRS class, started working on a smart gun. Basically, it's a firearm that incorporates biometric technology into the gun, so only the owner or somebody the owner chooses can use that firearm. Sounds kind of simple, but the reason why that's important is that there's an astonishing number of firearm deaths and injuries every year that come from the result of improperly secured firearms. That was the prototype, by the way. That come from improperly secured firearms. And so, basically, for example, every year in the United States, we have 21,000 firearm suicides. So 21,000 people every year commit suicide using a firearm. For 18 to 24-year-olds, it's the second leading cause of death. And so most of those 18 to 24-year-olds don't own firearms. But at the same time, they are using their firearms to commit suicide. They're using somebody else's firearms to commit suicide. Basically, what my technology allows is that only the owner can use it. And that means that if a child finds it, for example, comes across it in a cupboard, doesn't even know what it is, or a teenager comes across it or tries to use it to commit suicide, or even if, let's say, a robber breaks into a house and the owner of the house has a firearm for self-protection, pulls a firearm out. Most people in the United States are responsible firearm owners. They use their guns and everything properly, but very few of them have combat training. They don't know how to keep a hold of a firearm once they have it out and pointed at something. And so in a lot of those situations, that firearm is taken from them, and now the previously unarmed robber now has a gun, and that never goes well. So in all of those situations, my technology can prevent that. Basically, it only allows the firearm to be used when the owner wants it to be used. So that was the quick little 20-second overview. That was not 20 seconds at all, but that was a quick little overview. A little bit of background. So I started working on this, as I said, sophomore year of high school. It started as a science fair project for Dr. Strode's SRS class. I kept working on it. I don't think I had Ms. Reyes that year. She was the year before.
Yeah.
But any of my teachers that year will tell me that I think they saw more of my empty desk than they saw of me.
That's true.
But they were all very accommodating, and I managed to get all my work turned in eventually.
Yes.
But basically, I spent about 1,500 hours during that school year working on this technology, which, if you do the math out, is more than a full-time job while also attending school. Sometimes. No, actually, I did. I attended school like night. I was here most of the time. Most of the time. And anyway, so I ended up taking that to the International Science Fair. Won first place in engineering internationally. So that's the best engineering project in the United States, top 3 in the world. And then after that, I kind of burned myself out working on the project for a super long time. Any chance there's like a water bottle around here somewhere? I'm totally spaced on that.
Let me get you. I'm going to go to
Like a bug.
Yeah, let me get
Thank
you.
you. So, I pretty much burned myself out. I spent, all of my free time and time that I didn't have working on this technology, working on developing this, and it really wasn't, I got into science fair, probably was going to get me into college, to be perfectly honest, but it wasn't, some super big thing that I was planning on taking much further. However, about 2 months afterwards, I received a grant from the Smart Tech Challenges Foundation. Actually applied for it and then later received a grant from the Smart Tech Challenges Foundation. Basically, this is a group of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and innovators who came together and raised $1 million to basically specifically foster innovation in firearm safety. And that means that, since I just spent the last year and a half of my life developing innovation in firearm safety, I applied and ended up receiving a $50,000 grant from them. So I spent the next about 2 years working off of that grant. That prototype that was up here earlier was one of my earlier prototypes. I, in about a little over a month, about to have my first working prototype, so on a live firearm. Thank you.
Oops.
This is going well.
There. Sorry, I didn't mean to shake it up.
No worries. That's what quick drying shirts are for. So, I was rambling somewhere. Where was I rambling?
Great.
Oh, Grant, thank you. So I received a $50,000 grant. I spent about 2 years working off of that, and the culmination of that is in about a month, I'm coming out with my first live fire prototype. So previously I've been iterating on 3D printed plastic. Basically that I have a 3D printer at home, and it allows me to very quickly, develop and redevelop. So I can design a file one day, click a button before I go to bed, wake up the next day and have a physical model that I can test. And it either works or doesn't work, and then you repeat the process. That's an invaluable skill in terms of rapidly developing a new concept. But at some point, I'm not building plastic guns, I'm building actual guns. And so I've spent the last basically year developing the technology and everything, and developing the actually physical model, and we're almost done. So that's the sort of next big milestone for me. I can be ranting for like literally 3 or 4 hours. So you have questions, directions you want me to go?
So,
Things you want me to hit?
what are your thoughts? First of all, let's see if there are any questions that you would have. If you were gonna use him as a source now, yes.
I just have a question, like, I don't know if it's a question for answering this, but like, what was your stance on like gun violence and your stance on like guns before?
Right. So I spent my entire life growing up in Boulder.
Exactly.
That being said, the majority of my extended family lives in Tennessee. So I grew up using firearms, but not regularly. So every time we go out visit them, go skeet shooting, go down to the range, something like that. So I was comfortable with firearms. I didn't think as a 15-year-old I had a strong opinion either way. And like for me, this started as a purely engineering project. I didn't start from of course, I started from okay, here's a social problem, and how are we going to solve that? In my background, what I spent, most of my childhood and most of my life, basically, working on and being interested in was engineering. So, okay, here's this social problem, how can we solve it with engineering? So that's how I started, not like, oh, well, this big social political issue. And honestly, if I knew everything that I know now about it, I probably wouldn't have started. So it's some aspect that's good about going into things, with your head a little bit down, because fundamentally, firearms are a very tense topic. No matter where people stand on the issue, there's a lot of, understandably, a lot of really strong emotions or really strong opinions associated with firearms, and that means that. Plus, the firearm market has seen, I'm gonna say, no change for something like 50 years. There's been minor improvements in firearms. Slightly more accurate, slightly lighter, better polymer technologies, but almost no major, game-changing innovation. And so people aren't used to having change. Their firearms, they look the same as they did 7 years ago. And so there's been a lot of backlash and stuff like that. Nothing too crazy, but definitely, if someone had told me at the beginning, okay, you're going to spend the next 3 years of your life doing this. You're not going to go to school because of it. You're going to take the year off, which, by the way, was the best decision ever. Gap year's awesome. You're going to take the year off, and people are going to vary from wanting to give you money the first time they meet you to pushing you out the first time they meet you. I probably wouldn't have started, but I'm really glad that I did. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, that was a perfect question.
Go for it.
Have you had any other scientists help you out, or has this been like a pretty solo project?
Sort of a combination of both. For the first 2.5 years, it was completely solo. All the business, all the technological development, everything like that, I did myself. Just self-taught via the internet, pretty much. It's a series of small little problems, small little questions. You have this big problem. Okay, I want to create some work on. That if you just approach that as like one bite, it's impossible to get your jaws around unless you're like freakishly large snake. But if you take, okay, well, here's just this little tiny problem. How do we mechanically disable the firearm? Okay, well, what kind of actuator are we going to use to mechanically disable the firearm? You just break it down into lots and lots of small problems. So that's kind of what I did, and I researched each problem, solved it, and moved on to the next one. More recently, especially now I'm working with things that purposely explode. I've been working with teams of engineers, both here and in San Diego. So I've switched from doing most of the technological development to doing almost entirely business stuff at this point. So started as engineering, went to both, and now it's transitioned almost entirely to business. Go for
It's
it.
kind of a technical question
Yeah.
that's come to me like every time I hear about this. roughly like how long does it take to like go from a disabled firearm to a live firearm?
Good question. The production target is about 0.75 seconds, with the maximum second. So it's designed, the overall design goal for the entire system is for it to be completely transparent to the user. And that means that, you know, for somebody who's used to using normal firearms and is the owner, or somebody the owner has chosen to allow to use the firearm, there should be no extra steps, no swiping or pushing buttons or anything like that. They should be able to pick that firearm up just like a normal firearm and have it work. So that, one of the components of that is having it unlock quickly. It locks even quicker because to unlock it needs to actually process that fingerprint, which is about half the time, and then mechanically unlock the firearm. To unlock it, it just needs to say, "Oh my God, the finger's gone," and then it just locks. Sorry, I'm in a weird mood today.
No,
Go for it.
that's awesome. Yeah.
What sort of demographic are you trying to appeal to? Are you trying to appeal to just average citizens or like government? These like police?
Both. So there's sort of two pretty distinct markets for firearms. There's consumer use firearms, and that's broken down into, you know, self-defense, concealed carry, hunting, you know, sports with firearms. So there's all those sort of like reasons why normal civilians use firearms. That has a potential for saving the most number of lives, just because there's a lot more civilians than there are police officers. That being said, the police officers are the ones that buy, you know, 2,000 firearms at a time, which as a startup is a super attractive sort of perspective, perspective and opportunity. So, and that being said, over 10% of law enforcement deaths every year from firearms are from their own firearms because they're disarmed and then the firearms used against them. And so this technology could completely eliminate that, and we could save, you know, 12 to 16 police officers' lives every year with widespread adoption of technology. So there's definitely substantial applications for police use, especially since, you know, police and private security, they almost never want those firearms going off. You know, if a firearm's gone off, it means that something went wrong. And so, you know, they should always be going to like a non-lethal weapon, like a taser or something first. So they almost never want those firearms going off, and so added safety mechanisms, added things to sort of secure those firearms are very, very attractive to police departments. So both, those are different, very different use cases as well, because most consumers tend to use their firearms in relatively clean conditions, indoors, you know, not in the middle of the Afghanistan desert. And whereas police officers, you know, military need to be able to use their firearms in almost any conditions. And I don't know, probably many of you have iPhones or Androids with fingerprint sensors. You know that if your finger is particularly wet or dirty, it doesn't always unlock reliably. The technology that I'm using is better than that, but it's still not perfect when it's wet. And so that's almost an entirely different product, and I'm kind of trying to simultaneously develop both.
So when you mean wet, is that like from just physical wetness of a human being, or wet conditions like all around, or would that be, is that something you have to?
Sweat normally isn't an issue.
Yeah. Sweat isn't an issue.
Sweat, blood, depending on how much there is, normally isn't too much of an issue. They're in the middle of a rainstorm, it's not gonna work.
Okay.
If there's water running down the firearm, or their hands are like gripping, it's not gonna work. They're, you know, like clammy or sweaty, but that's fine, because most people in stressful situations are to sweat. And so it needs to work, like even for like an indoor use only model, it would still have to work with sweaty hands, which it does.
Which it does.
I
Or
just
blood.
have a business question. So, sorry, yeah.
Go for it.
I know there's quite a few firearm companies that like you said, they've basically changed nothing in their model for, you know, 100 years or so, and now they're like starting to see the ramifications of that because no one's buying them. Have you been approached by any of those companies or approached them to like potentially implement this, or is that not a question you can answer?
I can't answer that question. And the answer is no, because for a couple different reasons. One, I'm not going to stand up here and say, I single-handedly came up with the concept of smart guns. I didn't. They've been in science fiction since like 20 years before I was born. And a number of other people, you know, this is a relatively no-brainer solution. Once you implement it from a technology perspective, it has the potential to substantially reduce, you know, the negative effects of having firearms in our society, while not reducing the positive or intended effects at all. You know, so the reasons why people want to own firearms, it doesn't impede but it doesn't impede the reasons why people don't want to own firearms. So people have tried this before. About 14 to 16 years ago, a couple major firearm manufacturers supported by the government basically went out and tried to develop smart firearm technology. Technology itself was very different because it was 20 years old, but nonetheless, they all tried. And the political atmosphere and a bunch of more complicated things you don't care about, nonetheless, it resulted in huge backlash for the manufacturers. Smith & Wesson, they never even actually developed it. They just took some money from the government and said they were going to develop it. Got boycotted and lost 75% of their sales. That's enough to easily put any company out of business. And if you look at the current firearm market today, Colt recently filed for bankruptcy. So that's completely unrelated to smart guns. But if you take that as a rough and inaccurate sort of metric of the firearm market today, people are not going to take risks. Because long term, yes, this is a profitable product and probably more profitable than a normal firearm. But short term, it could kill a company. So, and the reason for that is they have to appease and appeal to every aspect of the firearm world. Every part of the firearm world. And fundamentally, smart guns are not the correct, they're not the right answer for the entire firearm world. And so, let's say a small, agile startup goes in there, we only have to appeal to the people who would actually use smart firearms. And those are generally the people who are a little bit more, I'm going to say, thought through about some of their opinions, and generally tend to be more sort of like middle of the road on most opinions. And that makes them easier to work with, and there's a little bit less backlash. So, if you look at early videos of me, like right after the science fair and stuff, I will say, I'm going to develop technology, I'm going to patent it, and I'm going to license it to a firearm manufacturer. There's my exit strategy. That's not going to happen. So now I'm, okay, great, how do I raise $7 million to manufacture firearms? Oh.
So you said you're going to MIT.
That's correct. So I did the college application thing. What grade
Which
are you
they'll
guys?
be doing at the end of the year,
Yeah.
so. He's a good person to talk to.
So you guys are just starting to feel the burden, interesting burden of applying to college. No, actually, if I can say one thing about that, it always turns out well. I know of the 50 people that I know that I keep in contact with who went to school, one of them isn't happy where they ended up. So some people got into all their schools, some people got into one of their schools, but everyone ended up happy. So you're not going to believe me, but it actually does turn out that way. That was completely off topic. MIT. So yeah, I did the college application thing, got into a couple different schools, of which MIT was one. I basically deferred my acceptance for a year, took a gap year. That's what I'm doing right now. I sort of try to balance it between working full-time on the startup and sort of traveling, taking some time off, and recharging the batteries before Fairview 2.0. And so Ms. Reyes mentioned I'm going to India, living in 2 weeks, 45 days mountaineering in the Indian Himalayas, which should be awesome. Doing a little bit of cycling in Tuscany. I backpacked around the UK earlier. So it's been a lot of sort of fun opportunities, and I've also had the time and effort. Trying to schedule meetings around Fairview class periods is really, really annoying, because it's like, okay, great, I can start at 10:55 and go to, no, if we actually start at an hour, then we're not going to have enough time. So we have to start at like random time in the middle of the hour, and then it's random time in the middle of the hour we're going to stop. And there's no place that has cell reception, and it's really loud and it's freezing outside. Is that all right? So I have to say I don't miss not being able to schedule meetings and phone calls and stuff. But so it's giving me the time and the ability to work on this a lot more. This.
What about like recreational, like shooting, like just going to a shooting range? Like I enjoy that. Like how would your like just going to like
Yeah, of course.
It's a lot of fun.
yeah,
I
it's
completely
lots of
agree with you.
fun. Like would you market to that type of area? Because I just don't understand the connection between like just recreational shooting, like Boy Scouts learning how to use a gun,
That's an interesting sort of question for a couple of reasons. Because the issue with recreational firearms, even there are a lot of people who let's say you own a firearm. I don't know, but let's just say you own a firearm, and the only thing you do with that firearm is take it to the shooting range. Drive back and forth from shooting range. But up happening in a lot of situations is even people who don't have firearms that are for self-defense, they just don't bother to lock them up. I don't completely understand why, because you know the amount of effort required to lock a firearm up versus the amount of effort, you know, the potential negative downsides of not locking the firearm up. I think I'm strongly in the lock it up category, but basically even firearms that aren't, you know, supposed to be loaded in the house or aren't supposed to be like sitting around end up sitting around. 70%, I want to say 72% of firearms in that are in households with children are completely unsecured and loaded. So in the United States as a whole, so that's like it's not something that I as a gun owner would ever do, but there are a lot of people who do that. And so for whatever their motivations or reasons for not locking those firearms up, with the smart gun, none of those apply. Because at any moment in time when the owner is not trying to actively use it, so they're not at the shooting range, you know, with the sights down range, that firearm's locked. So it's an interesting question, and it's one I get every now and then. It's not one of the more common ones, but there's also sort of back to it's probably not applicable for every single situation. You know, Boy Scouts learning how to shoot 22s. You know, that's probably more hassle than sport. And so, and plus the Boy Scouts, you know, there's literally a scout leader standing there watching the kids use them. You know, that's highly supervised. You know, firearms can be used very safely just when there's proper training and, you know, proper gun safety. Was that an answer? No? Perfect. Yes.
What, are you aware of the recent shooting of the, I don't even know her name, but the woman who's a firearm advocate in Florida? What are your thoughts about that?
We see stuff like that all the time. Really, it's, you know, there was the one in Walmart, which was very
Yes.
similar. The young kid pulled his gun out of his mother's purse. This one, the kid was sitting in the back with the loaded gun. You know, 3 or 4-year-old kid shot his mother. There's a lot of situations where, you know, I'm actually not against guns in any way. I at this point own multiple firearms. Most of them are spread out across my desk. But you know, I enjoy going down to the shooting range. I think that when used safely and legally, firearms don't pose a substantial hazard to our society. But that being said, there are always people who, and back to sort of what I was talking about with her, people who don't feel the need to lock their firearms up. And, you know, that's so God much I can say about that.
Well, in
You know,
both
a smart gun would have
cases-
prevented that.
Yes,
Yeah.
a smart gun would have prevented both of those.
So, a question or just a turtle order?
Yeah, what?
Go for it.
What? Oh, yeah, well, that's what their prompt will be on, and so
Oh.
you will be, you know, taking a stance and using, so look and see what, Kai's giving me a number of statistics, if you have any other statistics or thoughts you would like to.
I have a lot of statistics.
Yeah.
Go.
I had just a question
Yeah.
in general. What would be like the system for like setting up the gun and like putting in the fingerprint to the actual
Good
gun
question.
itself? And also, would there be able to have like more than just one fingerprint?
Yes and yes, or easy and yes, or okay. I'll actually answer your question. Basically, what happens is when the owner, you know, the person who purchases a firearm, when they buy it from the gun store, it's completely blank. There's no fingerprint templates or anything like that in there. And whoever is the first person to register the fingerprint for the firearm becomes sort of the added-in user, and they have the control to add or remove other users or sell the firearm. And so basically, the owner can, you know, add a spouse, a trusted friend, you know, even a you know, yeah, spouse, a trusted friend, a son, even if, you know, maybe there's no aspect of actual gun control to what I'm doing, because all it does is allow the owner to have more control over their own firearm. So if they wanted to add their entire block to the firearm, they can add their entire block to the firearm. You know, it's welcome to America. You know, but like at some point, you know, and there's a pretty much unlimited number of users you can add. At some point, at the point where you add added 1,000 people, not only did that take you like a ridiculous amount of time, but it kind of starts to undermine the security of a firearm by allowing 1,000 people to use it. So basically, you can have multiple people registered. The owner has control over who's registered and who's not registered, and the owner can also sell the firearm. Basically, that's the process of, hey, you purchase the firearm from me. There's a different process that he goes through. Pushes a different button, and that removes all of the users from the firearm and allows a new admin user, so a new owner, to register.
So what interface do the fingerprints go through? Like, do you plug it into a computer and then go through it, or is there like a touch screen on the gun?
There's a button.
Alright.
Well, one little button. And a light. Button and a light. So basically, there's a fingerprint sensor built into the grip of the firearm.
Mhm.
That's sort of the critical part that recognizes the user's fingerprint when they pick it up. That fingerprint's the same way that you capture fingerprints and enroll them in the firearm. So basically, let's say I'm adding a new owner, right? I would take a case off the firearm, or maybe like push a paper clip through a hole, and poke a button on the inside of on the circuit board, and that would sort of flash the light, say green, and then when the light's solid green, then I put my finger on the sensor. It takes about 10 times to initially enroll it. So you capture 10 fingerprints, they all go together into one, and then the light blinks red and then green again, and you're good. So it's some process like that. It's supposed to be really simple and really low power. So there's a little guide that comes with it. I'm just making these user processes up as I talk. But there's a little guide that would come with it, that said, okay, push this button and then put your finger on it, and then take it off, put it back on 10 times, and then release the button, and that will allow you to enroll the user. Sorry, you were first.
So what's your opinion on the idea of adding restrictions to who can and can't buy a gun? Like doing background checks on certain people, making sure they will use it properly? Because I know that affects it goes against the Second Amendment, but what's your stance on that?
I'm not going to answer that question.
Um,
Sorry. So in my work, you'll never see me take a firm stance on gun control either way, because I really pretty much half and half. Half my customers, half my supporters are people who staunchly support gun control, and half my supporters and half my customers are people who hate gun control. So as a public figure and the leader of the company, I'm neutral on that. What I feel is really important about smart guns is that they have the opportunity to sort of transcend the political gridlock around gun control. There's been a lot of quarter of an inch this way and a quarter of an inch this way and a quarter of an inch this way, which results in a lot of talking. And fundamentally, I almost never see anything actually productive get done. Okay, great, we reduce the number of rounds in a magazine. Okay, that doesn't really have any substantial impact on firearm users, but it also doesn't have, there's no evidence that supports that it actually reduces, murders. So most sort of gun control compromises are so compromised in one way or another that they just don't do anything. So what this technology allows is that it offers sort of something for both sides, if that makes any sense, because it allows gun owners to continue using their firearms for any purpose in which they want to be using their firearm. Basically, they can register the whole block. They can use that for hunting, target shooting. They can even use that to commit a crime. So it doesn't. There's no sort of context restrictions on the firearm. It allows the owner to do anything that they want to do with the firearm normally, and they have to accept the consequences just like they would normally. But at the same time, very few gun control supporters, and I've talked to Everytown for Gun Violence, Sandy Hook Promise. These are the largest gun control advocate groups in the country. Millions and millions and millions of dollars of lobby budgets. And I talked with their executive leaders, and very few of them have an issue with guns in general, like the concept of guns. They have an issue with the suicides, the accidental shootings, the murders, every sort of negative side effect that firearms have. They're not upset about people taking their firearms down to the range. And so, or most time even going hunting with them. And so this has the potential to not completely, but substantially reduce those sort of negative, I'm going to call side effects of having firearms in our society, while still allowing the owners to actually use their firearms the way they want to use them. Was that an answer? You're up.
Okay, I have another like question about the operating system of like the gun.
Yep.
Would you have to like charge it? Cause it like definitely uses electricity. Would you like
Good question.
replace the batteries or charge the gun?
So it has a lithium ion polymer battery in it, which is the same kind of battery as in your cell phone. Basically, the system's super low power, uses almost no power. And that means with a pretty small battery, we can get about a year of battery life. Battery's not user replaceable, or if it is, it's not like, you would put a new pack of double A's in there because there's not anywhere near enough space for like double or triple or even, there are quadruple A's by the way. There's not even enough space for the quadruple A's. So it's rechargeable. There's basically just a standard micro USB port on the bottom. That's what we're using right now. That's highly subject to change. There's no data communication through that, so it's not like you can, import fingerprint templates for your computer or anything, which also increases the security of the firearm. But you plug into a standard Android cell phone charger, and it takes about an hour to charge, and then it's good for another year. And there's a system inside of the gun that monitors the level of the battery, alerts the user a long time before the battery dies. And if they left it sitting in the safe for a year, they probably are going to need to clean it before it will work anyways, and so they can charge it sometime. And go for it.
So, like, what's your kind of like stance to like plan on like getting these to actually be used and like on a little scale?
So that kind of goes back to the two different markets question. For consumer markets, it's this is really a no-brainer. It takes some work to convince people of that, but once assuming I do my job right and the technology is very, very reliable and works in almost any situation, or at least works in any situation that I say. Assuming I do my job right, it really has no downsides. So over a normal firearm, I hope my target is to price them around $750. That's about $250 more than a traditional high-end firearm. So $250 is not a negligible amount of money, but I think most, based on my sort of market research and people I've talked to, most people buying a new gun, especially first-time gun owners, they think that $250 is worth the substantially increased safety of a smart gun. So once you actually have the products manufactured, it's you can sell them actually via online. There's processes to sell them online and transfer them through a local gun dealer. They do the background checks and stuff required depending on what state you're in, and then transfer them. So you can sell them online, and you can also sell them in stores. So that's developing partnerships with both big chains like Walmart sells a lot of guns, but also sort of smaller gun shops. And so that's basically just a sales problem. For the police departments and military, that's first you have to develop a model that can meet their specifications, and so that probably means not using fingerprints. There's some other opportunities out there, other options out there, none of which are particularly developed. So more development money, more time to develop those. But let's say you have a working model that meets police department specifications. That's actually in a lot of ways easier. It takes longer, but you basically submit samples to them for testing. They run, each department has their own testing regime. So I met with the chief of police of San Francisco, one of the largest police departments in the world. I only got 5 minutes with him, but nonetheless, he sort of gave me an outline of what their testing procedures are. Okay, a firearm has to get 10,000 rounds with no failures. That's super high level, but that's kind of the level most police departments test at. We're gonna strap them to the outside of a motorcycle and drive them around the dirt, in a muddy walk, and so they still have to work after that. So each department has their testing regimes, and they'll give those to you. You submit firearms for testing, they test them. Assuming they pass, then with smart guns, they probably start offering them to the officers instead of just like doing a complete rollout. But fundamentally, they are a cool gadget, and there are a lot of younger officers. I was gonna say more and more, but I suppose they all get older. So, there's a lot of young officers in police departments, and they're the ones who grew up with smartphones. They're the ones who grew up with using technology and trusting technology with every part of their daily lives, including very critical systems like pacemakers and stuff like that. AEDs. So that was a really long answer. Was that what you're going for?
Yeah, but like,
Follow-up question.
I guess just, so you're kind of assuming that once you have the product like ready and available that you'll be able to like reach this market, or?
Yeah, so I know those markets because I know I've done both informal market research myself, and there's a lot of people who who both reach out to me and who I reached out to, who definitely say, you're right, I would buy, can I buy one right now? There is a market. Whether that market is 5,000 firearms a year or 5 million firearms a year, I don't know. So that's where you need to do some more market research. For me, I haven't spent a huge amount of time focused on that because it doesn't matter if I can't develop a reliable technology first. And so, there is a market, and because there's a market and there's very few competitors to no competitors, that means I can reach the market. If that makes sense.
I was kind of wondering what, like your future, if you kind of like wanted to take, like, is this something that you're gonna like, you wanna spend the rest of your life on, and like, this is what you're gonna do, or like, yeah?
Probably not.
Okay.
Like I honestly, we'll see where it goes. But I think I'm much more of a startup guy than a long-term see it through sort of guy. So I'm definitely in this until either it fails or we get to the point of actually selling firearms, having manufactured reliable firearms. After that, that's a more day-to-day operations and stuff like that. I honestly don't know. That's really far in the future, but I have a lot of ideas, a lot of things I'm interested in. This didn't even start as me being interested in firearms. It started as an engineering project. So probably do other things. I'm going to keep working on it while I'm at MIT. Bring some more people on the team as like a full-time COO, Chief Operating Officer, to sort of run the daily operations of the company. And sort of. Again, I'm definitely seeing it through to the point where we either fail or succeed. Sorry, I'm very indecisive. Go for it.
So I assume you're going into engineering.
Yeah, so I'm going to MIT. It's I have like 10 minutes. That's right. Engineering, yeah, probably electrical engineering. I've also been doing that for 8 years. That might change. But yeah, that's MIT.
This might seem like a silly question, but where exactly is the sensor on the gun?
On the grip of the firearm. So if you imagine that this is the handle of the firearm,
Sure.
and they have the barrel coming out here. It's right here. So when you wrap your hand around the firearm, it gets your like middle or index.
And could you sign multiple fingers?
Sure.
Okay.
Just like different users.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Then, so is there like a left and a right hand in that sense?
Good question. So it's relatively easy to implement a ambidextrous model. Basically, you put a sensor on both sides. Whether or not people are going to want to pay for that costs a little bit more, just because the sensors themselves are probably the most expensive component of the entire firearm. Put two of them in instead of one, but that's pretty easy to implement. So yes.
So is it like one specific spot you have to put your finger, or is it kind of like a larger area?
Yeah, so for most people, so firearms tend to be sized based on like hand size. There are firearms that will work for people with larger hands, there are firearms that will work for people with smaller hands, with many exceptions. But that's sort of the general concept. And what we need to do is put that sensor in a place where it hits like 90% of users. And so basically, there's a standard sort of grip for firearms. Like every time you pick that firearm up, those three fingers are almost always in the exact same place. And so, basically, as long as we can get a sensor under that for almost all the users, it will work. And the ones that don't fit, we either create additional models or we lose those customers.